Huh?
Yeah.
What's it going to be?
Probably actually going more into the fine arts.
Fine arts.
Yeah.
Like which art?
Oh, yeah.
Hmm.
I used to do a lot of metalwork, so maybe we'll go back into that again.
Hmm. Hello, Leah. How are you? Matthew, what's going on?
Hey, not much. Walked in, wondering if you had class. Turns out you do.
Yeah. I got here at 4, and then I said to myself, why? But it was too late.
Oh,
You're Irish?
part Irish, yeah.
And the other part?
German Finnish.
Hmm.
But you guys Irish. What was, did you say that?
You wrote that in one of your papers.
Did I?
Yeah.
Okay. Probably.
Yeah. Yeah, Madison.
Are you in the process of grading the second assignment?
No.
No? I don't know my grade for that one.
Sorry?
I was wondering because the third assignment would be like next week.
Yeah. You know, reading essays is like dating. At a certain point, you lose interest in people. So you just sit home and watch TV. It takes a long time to be able to write really, really well. And so you ask yourself, you know, what does EJ really have to say? And even if it was to say a few things, what does EJ really know? How well has he processed experience? The task really is to just write well. Hey, that's all. Hello, Jordan. How are you? Well, thank you. Lay, what's on that on your head? It's very colorful. It's very colorful. Very colorful, but it looks good on you. No. I mean, yeah. Brett, what are you doing here? Yeah. So is there anything you guys want to talk about today, or should we just like look at each other and then go home? Leah?
How do we
I'm sorry, Leah, do you have a car?
No, I can't.
I asked you this yesterday and you said you commute? Take the bus?
Sorry.
Bart? Where do you live?
Berkeley.
What's the street? I'm just kidding. Okay. So if you were like to go somewhere You could?
Yeah.
Okay. Do you have a car? Do you need a car? Yeah. You don't have a license? Maybe Red can teach you. Red, you have a car, right? I'm sorry, go ahead.
How do we as humans become more comfortable with boredom? Or how do we, I guess, just how do we become more comfortable with pain and boredom in the pursuit of success?
You know, Leah, when I first started teaching, I would walk to class very anxious. My first class, I remember, it was at, I think, Sacramento State. See you in half hour. See you in half hour, Leah. What? Or Madison. So, and there was a reason as to why I walked in the classroom somewhat anxious. I had all these degrees, I had read all these books. Presumably, I had a teacher for about 10, 15 years with whom I worked. And doing all of those things gave me this self-image. I'm going to walk to class and do A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H. The students are going to do X, Y, Z. And so I prepared lectures, you know. And the name of the class was Persian Language and Culture. And there came these moments where, hello Mia. Good morning. There came these moments where I just were flat. I didn't have much to say. I didn't know how to connect ideas well. Just all over the place. And the moment that happens, you become very self-conscious. Then you kind of lose your path. You feel nervous. You begin to sweat, and then you begin to smell. And then students can actually feel that about you. And so you survive it, of course, for the next like 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 hours. And then you go home and you say, what the hell? You know, after all this stuff, I'm still, you know, a novice. And then 35 years or so later, I come to class at Laney College, October 30th, 2025. I'm actually comfortable, not knowing what the hell I'm going to talk about. And even when I do talk about not knowing why, and just come out very truthfully and say, I don't really want to be here. These ideas don't really mean anything. Whatever you think you understand, that doesn't amount to nothing. And it doesn't make me feel nervous, and it doesn't make me feel anxious. But it took a long time. It took about, I don't know, 2 weeks. By the time it got to, I think 1998, I was actually quite comfortable. Walking in the classroom knowing I know nothing, and leaving knowing I still don't know anything. And none of this stuff really means anything, because, hello, the truth is, it takes a long time to become proficient in anything. Consider for a moment that, you know, there is this idea that if I was to go to therapy, that in a year or so, I'll get myself together. I mean, that's at least the sort of advertisement that's sold to me. My parents tell it to me. My friends tell it to me. YouTube tells it to me. I mean, every goddamn force out there tries to sell me this piece of advertisement that if you focus on one thing or two things for about a year or so, you'll become very proficient. You know, it's kind of like an alcoholic. who walks into the center assuming that if he just goes to the meetings for 6 or 7 months, he'll be healed of a 20-year addiction. Then it takes you some time to realize that yes, philosophy is interesting, ideas are interesting. If they're trying to figure out what it means to be a human being, how one ought to function, they're all interesting questions. But like any other type of an art, to become proficient in any of them requires at least 20, 30 years of relatively focused work, And once you realize that, then a good amount of pressure is just off of you. You don't expect as much. I mean, you do, but you don't. It's, in the conversation we had on Tuesday about the stop exercise, one of the wonderful principles in Buddhism and most of the other isms out there is one of detachment. That I walk to class, sure. Do I want to be funny? Absolutely. Do I want to be exciting? Yes. Do I want to inspire people? Sure. Do I want to assist them in learning a few things? Yeah. But the truth is, all those things exist in the dark. I have no idea if I'm going to accomplish any of them. And if I want to kind of walk to class comfortably and leave the class comfortably, to some extent, you got to be detached in the sense that don't expect too much. I don't know you, Leah. I don't know what your capacity is. I don't know what you're ready for. I don't know what triggers you. And for me to walk into the classroom assuming all these assumptions, I'm going to come to class and do A, B, C, D, that's going to be quite infantile on my part. So why not just come to class and just wing it? Hey, Leah, how you doing? What's going on? Do you have a car? Do you know how to drive? Maybe Red can, teach you how to drive. You just wing it for half hour. And, in the course of half hour, maybe something will click or maybe it won't. And knowing that there isn't really much anyone can do for anything except once in a while be a stepping stone. You kind of treat most things under the sun relatively casually. If I was to be truthful, I have forgotten your question completely. Hello, how are the kids? I know, it's awful, just awful. Yeah, right. What do you do with your hair? You just got a haircut. Yeah, but how do you make it look like that? Can I do it like that? EJ, why are you laughing? That's offensive. Stop it. Yeah, please, go ahead.
You think because of your experience through life and the education that you're closer to this group to understanding that you understand?
I understand my deficiencies. I understand my incompetence in certain areas. A good amount of my hopes and fantasies have been removed, for good or bad. You're in school to get a degree, right? And then with that degree, you're going to get yourself a job. And with that job, if you're able to kind of treat money in a very mature way, you'll be able to buy yourself a house. And then if you have any brains to you, you buy yourself a nice woman or a man or a dog or a cat. And you will know how to treat that person relatively well. And then there comes a point where you realize that you and your companion simply are not enough, and now your desire for a family comes forth. And then you go through the pains and suffering of raising children. And then there comes a point where you look yourself in the mirror and you're no longer 20 or 30 or 40 or 50, you're like 62, 63 like me. The only difference between you and I really is that I have the things that you're pursuing and you're going to be pursuing for the next like 40 years. The only perhaps difference between you and I is our temperaments. My temperament is a bit introverted, it's a bit bleak and, pessimistic, and yours may be the exact opposite. Even though you'll get to my conclusion at some point in your life, the fact that you'll have these moments where it's like life slaps you and says, wake up, you're no longer 20 but 60. What are you doing with your time? You've raised kids, they're beautiful children, but who gives a shit? One is in Kansas, the other is in like Texas, and you're like in a nursing home. And then you begin to evaluate the way you spent your time, spent your energy. That's the only difference you and I have, And so when you raise your hand and you say, kind of like Madison, are you going to read my essay and give me a grade? Or what is my grade in this class? Or I'm going to be missing a class. It's not about you. I'm going to be missing a class, so can you tell me what exactly, you talked about? Those questions for me are no longer that interesting. And they're not going to be interesting for you either after a while, And that's one of the problems, I think, with the imbalance of power and experience in this class. You don't know the conclusion of what happens when the semester is over. I know the conclusion. You're looking forward for an A. I'm looking forward to just this class being over and you looking at your grade and realizing it means nothing anymore. But you spent 16 weeks to get there, the nothingness, So I come to the class a bit more nonchalant than you do, So, again, I don't know what you asked, but I guess that's Jordan? Ali? Okay, so, yes, go ahead, EJ.
What,
Before you pee your pants.
what does it take to drive someone out of complacency? Seems like an ideal situation for most people. They can be comfortable with that.
There are people in this room who are asleep, who are tired, who are indifferent, dismissive. They're passive, but not a sort of passivity where you are receptive. Sometimes something is empty but does not desire to be filled with anything. Sometimes one is empty and desires to be filled. There's a difference. So some passivities are actually quite passive, indifferent, dismissive, and you can just categorize them as just being stupid. And there are certain passivities where you're actually open to receiving something that will benefit you. Okay, you don't really know what that is, but it'll come to you. Now, your question is, given the fact that we sit in a room filled with like 30 people, half are playing with their phones, the other half are playing with themselves, and then the other half are just are not interested, the other are just bored, whatever the case may be. The question is, well, how do you bring people to life? In essence, you have to babysit them, okay? Which means that if, for example, you're complacent, dismissive, passive in a toxic, poisonous way, I look at you. If I want to wake you up, I have to be interested in you. If I'm not interested, I don't care about how you want to be in this class. I'm not going to spend time with you. I'm not going to waste my energy on you so I can get a quick arousal out of you. That doesn't interest me. It's like one of the first questions you should usually ask when you go on a date is, do you have a boyfriend or a girlfriend? The answer is no. When was the last time you had one? If it's 2 weeks ago, you ask, so how intimate were you guys emotionally? Say, I'm still stuck. Pay for your bill and just go. The idea that you're going to babysit this person for the next 5 years until you have access to their soul, that's just being stupid on your part. So the idea of coming to class and looking at you and coming to realize, you're just quiet, dismissive, uninterested. I'm not going to spend my time trying to, have you entertained for 2 minutes and then going back to sleep. You want to fall asleep, fall asleep. I don't give a shit. You're nobody to me. I don't care about your success or failure. Now, of course, that's something inappropriate to be said by any faculty member. Why? Because we're for student success. You want them to be successful. You want them to prosper. Right? I mean, at a certain point in your life, you're going to visit the AA center, right? I mean, or maybe some rehab center. It doesn't really matter. Just a hypothetical, right? And the truth is, the person who's guiding the group, he or she can only do so much, man. If you just come to come to the center and you just passed out because you're drunk, what do you want this person to do? People give up. It's like any other relationship. At a certain point, you just walk away from the relationship, no matter how much you love the person. It doesn't work. So, if I care for you, then yes, I will go on the assault. Embarrass you, make fun of you, entertain you in some shape or form so you could be forced out of your slumber. If on the other hand, I don't care for you, that's just it. Haven't you paid attention? There are certain people in this room, their hand goes up and I don't see the hand going up. There are certain people whose hand don't go up, but their hands are always up. They just have difficulty asking. And you just have to pay attention to body language and, look at Ohani, for example. How you doing, man? Good job. Anyone else? Leslie.
How do you really learn to learn from it, really? Because, for example, if we talk.
Okay. So, Leslie, imagine that I am your mom for a moment. But I have a lot of shortcomings. I don't really know how to be a good mom. I put food on the table for you, but for the most part, I dismiss your emotional life, I dismiss your intellectual life, and because I have no money, I have no choice but to dismiss your physical desires as well. So when it comes time for you to come to me and ask for a few bucks, sorry, you're on your own, okay? And so, for the next 5, 6, 10 years of your life, you go to various bookstores, you go to Amazon, and you buy books. The Perfect Mother, let's just say, okay? And you become very, very insightful. The path towards marriage, the path towards finding the right companion, the best path to be in a relationship, in a marriage. You're very, very wise. So people come to you and ask you questions about marriage, about relationships. And you're like the Jesus Christ for them, But for the most part, your wisdom is theoretical. It just exists inside your head. You have the ability to kind of piece this information together in such a way that is provocative, it's interesting, it's inspiring, and you actually benefit people in so many different ways. But again, remember, your wisdom is theoretical. It hasn't come down and it hasn't been pushed around by life. You're a single woman. All you do is sit in your bedroom and read book after book after book, and you yourself write few things. Okay. And then you get to be 35, 40, and you go to a coffee shop as usual to read your book, and this guy over there, red, comes your way. You look at his hair and you say, oh my God, I'm in love. And you guys start a relationship. Now, you try to do the ABCDs, all the stuff that you read and all the stuff you talked about. But the truth is, for the first time, you come to realize that their application is really, really, really tough. You get tested. It's kind of like you go to therapy, your therapist tells you ABCD, you come out, try to apply the ABCDs, only to realize they just don't work. I mean, they're good in books, they're good as pieces of conversation, but in real life, they just don't make any sense, And so your task is, first you become humiliated in the sense that you have all this wisdom, but you can't do anything with it in real life. And so for the first time, what you realize is wisdom, when tested, about 90% of it is useless. And that makes you profoundly humble. Not for me, not for Red, but before yourself. You actually say, man, I thought I knew, but I'm realizing I don't really know. Now, a few things happen. You either become disgusted with everything that you've known, you've read, you've talked about, very much like St. Thomas Aquinas, around the 15th or so century, if I'm not mistaken. He was one of the founding fathers of Christian theology. Before his death, at the age of 49, he had this experience. You and I spend, it's like me going to school and getting some stupid degree in philosophy. And I love Socrates because I read him in books. Then one day I actually run into a Socrates. And he makes me feel incompetent. He makes me feel intellectually like an infant. And I realize my degrees don't mean anything. Everything I've talked about in philosophy classes, they're like childish. It just makes me feel profoundly bad about myself. I'm disgusted. Now, what this does for me is that I, to some extent, humble myself before Socrates and say, you're my teacher. You're like the living Bible. Give me philosophy. And so when your wisdom gets tested, you realize you don't really know what you're talking about. And that's what happened to Aquinas. Aquinas has an experience that after he comes out of this out-of-body experience, he looks at his congregation and says to them, everything I've said, everything I've written, garbage. If you really want to know what religion is, you do all these different things only to obtain an experience. And once you get the experience, you realize all the things you have read, all the things you have heard, all the things you have written are just nonsense. Okay. So, wisdom then branches out into two things. Theoretical and the part that has to do with its application. Application is always tough. It's always tough. So what happens is you and Red get together, you guys get married, and now you begin to realize the complications. And once in a while you catch yourself acting, behaving like your mom. Say, oh my God, I hated that woman. Right? But now I catch myself being like her. So you try to do some damage control, you become mindful, as the Buddhists would say. You create some images in your house, whether it's mental images or physical images. Every night you sit and focus on those images to overcome the addictions you have to certain patterns of behavior. And then you have children. And then you realize, oh my God, you're being as dismissive to your own kids as your own mother was to you. What happened to all that wisdom? Trashed. And so it takes a lot of effort for you to bring what's above down below and making sure you're doing the justice to it. It's always tough. Don't ever, 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 ever follow anyone who talks well. Don't ever, ever, ever listen to anyone under the age of 70 or 80. The most valuable thing is experience. That's all, experience. Yeah.
On that same topic, is discernment and knowledge enough to avoid finding ourselves in bad situations? Like, will reading bell hooks or Simone de Beauvoir make us immune to like being in bad relationships or something?
Can I tell you a story, Leah? About 15 years ago at Laney, I had a student. He was a high school teacher. He joined some movement the principal found out and he got fired. So to find himself a different kind of employment, he decided to go back to school and get a higher degree, and when I first met him, he was this 34-year-old African American, very, very nice man, extremely nice. And one day he comes to my office and he says, "I want to learn." I told him one condition. What? You can't be African American. At first he took my comment very offensively. He said, "Are you racist?" I said, "No, it's not about that." He says, "Why do you say that for me to learn I have to stop being African American?" I said, "Look, for the past 34 years, you have a certain self-image. There is nothing wrong with the self-image, but that self-image is cultural, it's social, it's political. And so whenever you try to make any decisions, those forces intervene and obstacle whatever it is that you want to do." So I asked him to do something very difficult for me. Whenever he comes to class and whenever he comes to my office, he should stay quiet, not say anything, not feel anything, not think anything. Just let me have my way with him. And so he continued coming to my class for the next 5 years. And you know what I gave him? I don't know what I gave him, but at any rate, he began to slowly think differently and feel differently and speak differently. And after 5 years, I told him he no longer needs to come to my office or my classes, and he can go back to being African American. Because now he has a processing mechanism on the inside. He knows how to choose things without dismissing his culture, without dismissing his narratives, without dismissing his heritage. It's important. You must always go back to who and what you are, okay? But you need to have the processing tools where you can kind of break things down, look at them, understand them, and then apply them if you possibly can. So, I don't know how much of your question I understand, but if I was to give you another story, I had this friend, she went to Stanford and she became a therapist. And the only reason she became a therapist is because she had crummy parents. She was never able to be in a good relationship, despite having a PhD from Stanford, despite having an office where she heals people. Her own life was chaotic, And the reason is that information by itself doesn't really do much for you. Knowledge by itself doesn't really do much for you. And it takes you a long time to embody the things that you know. And then it takes you even longer to apply the things that you embody. So, anyways, Ali?
Celebrate home.
I naturally look like a terrorist. There is no reason for me to dress up. Just wear a traditional outfit and walk the streets. Yeah. What's that on your head? Fine. What do you want to say? Hurry up.
Why are kind people taking advantage of it?
Say again?
Why are kind people taking advantage of it?
So there is this great story that comes from one of the Upanishads. It's a set of scriptures from the Hindu tradition. It's about a monk who's sitting by this pool of water and sees a scorpion falling into the water. And scorpions and water don't really mix well. And so he puts his hand in the water and rescues it. And as he puts the scorpion on dry land, the scorpion bites him or stings him. And the monk goes, "Ow, you piece of shit, I just rescued you." And as the scorpion is walking, he falls into the pool of water again. And the monk again rescues him. And so a passerby looks at the monk and says, "What is wrong with you? You know, I've been standing here for the past like 5 hours and the scorpion has been falling into the water like 50 times and you keep rescuing it and it keeps stinging you." And the monk looks at this passerby and says, "Well, the scorpion must follow its own nature as I must follow my own. That I am a monk, I am in the business of compassion, forgiveness, and the scorpion is in the business of stinging when it sees harm." But, you know, usually stories like that are very flowery. They're like, you know, the hippie tales of the 1960s. They just make no sense and they're, for the most part, very stupid. They're nice to talk about, they're nice to think about, but they don't really have much value, and I'll tell you why. Human life is short, and we're always in harm's way. Life itself, people, and our own ignorance, because regardless of how much you think you know, human knowledge is always going to be limited. And as long as you have limitations, there's going to be limitations in perspective. There's always going to be limitations in the way you ought to feel, but you don't. The way you ought to speak, but you don't. The way you ought to behave, but you don't. So we're always at fault, always. Christianity, which America is for the most part, it's founded on Puritan philosophy. And I think all these religious traditions, in some shape or form, you know, it's like going to a therapist and he or she keeps telling you, forgive your parents, forgive your parents, forgive your parents, you know. And no, you don't need to forgive your parents. They fucked you over. You know, forgiving your parents is like the last stage of your acceptance. Like you got to go through 30 years of up and down. Stop telling me forgive my parents. I'm not there yet, man. You know? So there are different ways that you can exercise generosity. Okay? You see a person who is homeless. The idea of going to him and saying to him that, listen, I know you're starving, but remember what Jesus says. A human being does not live by bread alone. Sit and pray to God. The guy's like dying. You know, your act of kindness is not by giving him a Bible for free, but going to In-N-Out and giving number 2, cheeseburger, fries, and a Coke. That's one layer of generosity and kindness. Which means that just in case you're a Christian and you're a Bible thumper and you're gung-ho about the spiritual aspect of the human being, you really need to put that on a cross, nail it, bury it, make sure it doesn't resurrect, so you could buy this man a number 2 at In-N-Out. Okay? That means that you have to stop self-delusion, that you're this prophet who's there to save people's soul. The guy just needs food. Okay? As you buy him or her a number 2 at In-N-Out, an hour passes by and you see someone sitting on a pavement and you assume that they're hungry. So you go to In-N-Out and you get them number 2 and you say, here's some food, and say, I just ate. But the way they say, I just ate, you feel a hint of sadness, despair in their voice. And you realize that the act of generosity on your part is not so much to give him money or to give him food. He just needs a couple of free ears for about an hour or 2. And now your act of kindness has to do with giving him your time, your youth, your vitality, your ears, and making sure your mouth is shut. He just needs to vent. He's not seeking advice. Okay. And you realize that you have entered a different shade of generosity and kindness. Okay. Then you walk another hour and there is another fellow sitting, and this time they're crying. And again, you assume that they're starving, you buy them in and out, but that's not what they want. You sit them, you say, talk to me, and that's not what they want. And you realize what they really want is a piece of sound, experienced, seasoned advice. Okay? And so you sit them down and say, listen, you know, when I was your age, now Lovell at this time is like 60, the skater is like on the pavement, tearing up, is like 20. You know, I dropped out of school and I did A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, and I was sad, depressed. I wanted to like cut my jugular and end it all there. And then you explain to him what despair is, how depression works, how loneliness is, and all that stuff. And this kid sees his emotions in your words. And you realize your act of generosity for about 2, 3, 4, 5 hours to try to ram your wisdom into his thick skull, it actually pays out. You know, it works. And he kind of kisses your hand or bows and touches your feet and says, thank you, Lovell, you know, my life has been transformed, so to speak, for a few minutes, and goes his way. Then you walk another like 5 hours and there's another guy or gal, you know, just looking sad. And you think it's your wisdom, you think whatever. And you realize all the things you've done before is no good. He kind of feels homeless. And you ask him some questions, you realize he's got like a few $1 million in the bank account, he's got a wife, he's got a few kids, beautiful life, and yet he feels spiritually hollow. Now, if you have a soul inside you, then you can share that with him. Remember, in all these different scenarios, you had something to give. You had money to buy food, you had ears and time to give, you had processed experience in the form of wisdom to give, you know. And now, if you don't have a soul, you can't reach him spiritually. If on the other hand, you have looked at soul as a craft that you have to first look for, then you have to obtain, then you have to play with it for a long, long time to understand what it is and how it functions, then you can give part of what lives inside of this other fellow. Okay. Now, which means ultimately the following. You need to know what you have. You need to know if the other person is in the right place to receive what you have. Okay. Sometimes you know that the person can only receive but not apply. Sometimes you know they can receive, they also need to apply, and they have the capacity to apply, but they need some support system. You know, it's like you really don't want to be in this relationship, but every time you go home and you're alone, you call your girlfriend back and you say, hey, I'm really, really sorry. The only way you can refrain yourself from calling is if I ask you, Lovell, won't you come stay with me for a month? And every time you have this temptation or desire to call this woman, you know, you say, Amir, you know, I want to call her. I say, no, let's go for a walk, you know. So, and the other thing is, you know, you gotta, whenever you see pain, and that's one of the functions of pain, you're inspired to help. And there is nothing wrong with that. There is nothing wrong with the feeling, and there is nothing wrong with acting on the feeling. I think when you're young, it's okay. If I was to be honest about where I am in life, I don't have the luxury of time or energy. When this class is over, I kid you not, I run to my office, I change my clothes, and I run to my car to go home. I don't care who knocks on the door. I don't care who comes to the office. I just don't have the energy at this stage. Maybe next year will be different. And am I being mean? Yeah. But my meanness is an act of kindness towards myself. I know my capacity. I know how much fuel I have in the tank. You know. And so for you to be able to express kindness the way that fits you, you need to kind of figure out where you are, what you are, how much you have, what you have, you know, and who you're mingling with. And don't be self-deluded. You know, we're nobodies. So, yeah, Tiffany.
When we write our essays, I find myself always saying like we need to practice self-reflection, or like in the lectures we mention self-reflection a lot, but I'm having trouble like seeing what self-reflection really looks like. Like how does that look like? How do we practice that?
I have a few ways of answering your question. The easiest is to look at your question very casually. The second is to make fun of you. Oh, sorry, Lay.
Sorry.
It's okay. To make fun of you and say, oh, that's a really, really stupid question. Or to refrain from making fun of you or looking at your question casually and actually take you very seriously. I am tempted to make fun of your question, and I'm tempted to kind of pass by your question and dismiss it, you know, because the questions such as that are really, really interesting. They're very serious, very important. I also need to have the proper energy, you know, to kind of approach it. And as I'm hearing the question, I say, you know, the best way is, you know, Tiffany doesn't usually come to class. Tiffany doesn't usually ask questions. I can just pass it by. She wouldn't mind. She's nice enough, and, you know, she likes me and I like her, and so she won't take offense. But then I look at you and I hear the question and I say, you know, Amir, don't be stupid. You know, you have all these options, and you have these options because you have power. You know, there's a student, there's an instructor. You could just make fun of the questions and go your way, you know. Or overcome your laziness, sloth, complacency, and listen to the question and look at the person who's asking the question and take that question seriously, approach it the right way. And so you realize that before I can actually react to my first instinct, which is dismiss it, I block that particular temptation and I approach it very, very, very seriously. So, or at least as serious as I possibly can. So there is thinking and then there is reflecting. Thinking is always your reaction to the things outside. Thinking always pushes you into being like a calculator or a robot. Okay, thinking always means that you're not really embodying or internalizing what's happening. You're just basically reacting. And it's something that all of us in this class do. You know, my father comes home, I say, give me $1, he screams at me. And I react, and rightly so, because it's the first thing that all human beings do. We are reactive creatures. Reflection is not part of our organism. You have to really be trained to hold back your emotions, hold back the reaction. You know, something that people usually, I think, often learn in like therapy sessions, that they have like these explosions of emotions all the time. And if your therapist is good, and if you're at the right place in life, every time you want to react, because your relationship with your therapist has been like for 5, 6, 7, 9, 10 years, every time you want to spew something out, you hold yourself. You say, no, not right now, okay? So reaction or reflection is an event happens, and instead of you reacting, you internalize it. And then you close your eyes. That's your allegory of the cave, okay? You take this experience to your interior, okay, and you say, okay, let me open this up. You know how your digestive system works? It breaks down food. And when you begin to reflect, you break down an experience into tiny little pieces. And then you try to look at these pieces, as many parts as you can possibly break down. And then you try to see what lives inside it. Now, reflection is always solitary, always solitary. I can't help you. The only thing I can do in this class is excite, inspire, and encourage you to stop thinking as much and reflect a bit more. Which means that when I say something that you don't like, instead of raising your hand and saying, Amir, you're a piece of shit, you keep that to yourself. You take what I said inside you and say, okay, why did he say that? Does that make you passive? Absolutely. Does that mean I have the power to exploit you, annoy you, harass you? Definitely. But the way you approach it is kind of like the idea of passive resistance, practiced by Martin Luther King Jr., as well as Mahatma Gandhi, and many other fellows out there. That when harms comes your way, you don't react to violence by being violent. You always turn the other cheek. And the way you turn the other cheek is you take the experience in, you reflect on it. Why did Amir say this? What is wrong with him? Why is it that a 62-year-old man with all these degrees comes to class and acts like an ass? You know, I need to go to his office and talk to him about his behavior and not shame him in front of the public. You know, that's an act of reflection, which is really, really tough. You need to like the way you are. You need to like the way you want to be. You have come to be disgusted with the way you react, i.e. rooted in thinking. And you slowly come to realize you actually enjoy reflecting. Now, the negative side of reflection is the following. And going back to Lavelle's question about kindness, every time someone harms you, you don't react. You take the experience in trying to unpack it for yourself. If you are not careful, what happens in the act of reflection, you fail one very, very important element: justice. Sometimes reflection needs to be expressed physically. You understand why I slap you. You understand it. And you have forgiven me plenty of times. Now you've become addicted to reflection without physical expression. Your task at this stage is, I know how this stuff works. If Amir slaps me next time, I will slap him back. And your slapping me back is an act of reflection, not reaction. It's time for you to teach me how to behave as a human being. And you need that. So think of the art of reflection as you eat food. If your digestive system is not strong enough to break things down, you have diarrhea, you have constipation, you have all sorts of health issues. And that's one of the problems with like some shades of mental illness or depression. An experience comes your way and you react, okay? And then what happens, you become addicted to just reacting to things. The nice thing about therapy is that, again, if you have a good therapist and if you're in the right place, is that you are on this path to reflect, to process experiences and hopefully understand them. But it is a solitary path. You're on your own. And your best companions are books, audios, just to help you have the language. Yeah.
How do you reserve yourself self-exploitation from like
If I was to be honest, I'd say it's impossible. Here's the thing. There is a generational gap. You and I, Lay, I was born at a time where my culture only gave me 5 pieces of advertisement. That was it, just 5. So I only had 5 options. I could only choose 1 out of 5. That's it. There was a time that if you want to get married, your parents kind of help you. And they introduce you to maybe 5 or 6 people. That's it. Okay. If you're unhappy with the marriage, tough luck. If you're unhappy with your life, look around you. Everybody's miserable. So keep your mouth shut. These are the options that we had. In 2025, if you look at the forces around you, the world of advertisement spent over $350 billion in 2023 to create advertisements. And what is really a piece of advertisement? It's an art form that is there to suspend your ability to discern, to make sound judgments, Every piece of advertisement is a piece of temptation, you know. And then you inject in it the idea of autonomy, free will, independence, individuality, maturity. And what you realize is that people gravitate toward all sorts of garbage because they feel and think that they're independent and they're making this decision on their own. Okay. So what you're talking about is a 10-year-old has this device called a cell phone or YouTube. And we no longer have the capacity to sit and watch a movie for 2 or 3 hours because we've been contaminated by shorts, Instagram, YouTube, you know, all these things. And so we're losing that capacity to follow a storyline that may take 2, 3, 4, 5 weeks. We don't have the capacity. Okay. And so because of the absence of that capacity, we get bored very, very easily. And boredom is not fun. But being inspired is really fun. It brings you to life. You know, it's like pornography. One of the reasons that pornography is the most powerful money-making machine in this culture is because, well, when you're dealing with like 70% of your population being sad and depressed, how do you bring them to life? Well, pornography, sex is the quickest way. You don't really need to do much. You know? I think the best way to create a force that goes against all these pieces of advertisement, guilt. Imagine you and I in a relationship. I love you, you love me, we have a good life together. And you become interested in EJ. You know. Every time you look at him in a strange way, like a romantic way, if our relationship has created guilt inside you, you will feel guilty for fantasizing about him. And that guilt gives birth to shame. And then when you come home, you're not going to tell me your fantasies about EJ, but maybe you say, Amir, let's go have food outside. That's the way you combat the temptation. But without guilt and shame, nothing. There is nothing you can do. Now, how do you create guilt and shame? Look at your parents. If you have crummy parents, look at your grandparents. If you don't have them, look at your aunts or uncles who have some decency to them. If you don't have them, instructors. You don't have them, books. You don't have them, watch movies that inspire you. In other words, you need some sort of an icon, some sort of a hero to worship. And when you respect something, you try to emulate, embody some of those qualities. You know, I don't know if I've told you this, but I don't live very far from, what's her name? One of the founders of the Black Panthers. The woman, Angela Davis, that's right. You know, like, once in a while, and she hasn't been around for a long time, she's always like going places and giving talks. Every time I see her walking her dog, and her dog's name is Seneca, figure that, a Stoic philosopher. You know, she doesn't need to look at me. She doesn't need to talk to me, and I don't need to talk to her. But I know her history. I know what she went through. I know what she stands for. I know what excites and interests her. And she's no longer like 20. She's like an 80-year-old woman who does Pilates every day at her age. And she looks really, really good and really, really hot. Right? And I look at her and her mere physical presence, her physical body makes me feel guilty for the way I live my life. My life revolves around my family. Her life revolves around people. She lives a big life. I live a small life. And you realize if your friends were like Angela Davis, you know, or the characters in Harry Potter, even if you worship Voldemort, you know, then you try to kind of embody some of those qualities. And anytime you go against those qualities, you feel embarrassed and ashamed and guilty. And then that makes you religious because you want to be better. Because you see in Angela elements of beauty and you want those for yourself. And when you ever shortchange yourself, you punish yourself intellectually, emotionally, physically even. One of the things in the Middle East is that, let's say I'm a crummy son to my mom, my parents. So you know what my mom does? She fasts for 1 week. She eats nothing from the moment the sun comes up to the time the sun goes down. And there's a reason why she fasts. First, it's a religious culture. Second, my mom is somewhat religious. Third, she knows that this is what she believes, that if she makes some sacrifices, those sacrifices create some energy out there somewhere. That maybe when I come home, she's in the kitchen making me lunch while herself is fasting. And I look and say, wow, I'm a shitty human being. Here's my mom on my behalf. She is fasting at the same time in the kitchen, in the presence of food. She won't be tempted to eat, and yet she's making it for me. So, what's that on your head? Anyone else? Matthew.
How much can we trust our senses to make decisions? How certain can we really be about anything?
So there are 4 things or 5 things. Your body has the power to sense. Your body has the power to feel. Your body has the power to think. Your body has the power to what we call emotions, i.e. psychology. And your body has the power to intuit. Intuition is this very, 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 very mature digestive system. It's very different than just, I feel. Okay. One of the things about feelings and emotions and thinking is that they're always revolving around your biases. And all of us are biased for the simple fact that we all have experiences. Those experiences create senses as well as feelings. We categorize them as good, bad, right, wrong, pleasant, unpleasant, okay, happy, painful. And so it's something that people of color oftentimes experience. You walk into Safeway and everybody looks at you. So it's kind of like if you've seen the movie Remember the Titans, okay? But going back to your question, first it depends on what exactly it is that you have to make a decision on. If it's something simple, just wing it. The consequences are not going to be as dire. If on the other hand, you're 18 and you're making these, it's like when you fall in love and you want to marry your lover. When you're in love, it's like you're drunk by this emotion. And if you've ever been drunk, you should never sit behind the wheel. And you should never have access to the gas pedal. And you should never have access to the power to drive, okay? Oftentimes you're going to crash or you're going to just hit someone, okay? So when you're intoxicated by the emotion called love and then you make all these stupid and foolish decisions, all you have to do is just wait for the disaster to come your way, okay? When it comes to big decisions of life, always seek an elder's advice, always, without question. When it comes to small things, whatever. Should you trust yourself? If there has been an experience for you, repeated many, many, many times, but you continued making it, at a certain point, you stopped making that decision. You went through this process of examination. Why, how, when, who, what the hell is wrong with me? When you've understood the experience, I think by then you will have a good head on your shoulder where you can make a decision that may benefit you 70% and may harm you. There's a chance of 30% negativity, but that chance you can take. The other aspect is if you got no mom, if you got no dad, if you got no friends, if you got no faith in people, if you don't trust anyone, well, you're on your own. Let's just say that happens to be your circumstance, that you got no elders in your community, you don't like people, you don't trust people. You just come to this class and I like you. And you like me a little, okay? If I feel that you are worth my time and my emotions, I will invite you to my office and I will manipulate you. I say, listen, Matthew, you ask good questions. Instead of wasting your time doing biology, shit, you got all the stuff inside you, ready to explode. Why not do philosophy? Take all my classes. Don't even attend. I'll give you A's. Then go to San Francisco. But make sure you apply to Stanford and Yale as well. Get your master's in philosophy and humanities. If you get your master's from Stanford or Yale, you don't need anybody's help. Your resume will do the job. If on the other hand you go to East Bay, you will need my help. Come back to me when you have your master's. I'll have you teach in this school. I'll open a couple doors for you. Once you have a teaching assignment, other doors will open. But for that to happen, I need to like you, you need to like me. And you need to sacrifice your dislike and you not trusting people. You have to take a leap of faith, as Kierkegaard would say. You don't like me, stand outside of my door. I had a student some years ago. She said to me, the reason why I'm knocking on your door now is I would go to the tower building, but I would never go to the elevator. After 5 weeks, I went into the elevator. Then I pushed the 4th floor, but it never came out. Then I would come out. I will look at your room 402, but I would never knock on the door. Then I would knock on the door and just run. Then she knocked, the door opened, we sat, we talked, she got her master's, she's now teaching. And the point I'm trying to make is, those are the leaps of faith that you have to take to get to a place where you want to go. Anyone else? Tiara? Anything?
We're talking about how someone is
The guilt and the shame? Look, you're a mother of 3 or 4 or 5 or 6. Okay. So, I don't know if this has been your experience. It has certainly been mine. That your kids are young. They can be any age. The kids are stupid for the most part. They can be young and they do something stupid. And you love them. You care for them. You want them to have a relatively healthy future. But you also realize they've done something horrifying. So you scream at them. You piece of shit! Right? And then you look and you say, well, this kid is only 6 months old. And you feel guilty for your screaming. You feel guilty for maybe physical punishment, a tiny spank, on the cheek or whatever. And then you feel guilty. And the way you overcome the guilt is that you say, you know what? Forget doing your homework. Let's go have some pizza together. Chuck E. Cheese. And even though you don't have very much money, whatever you have in your savings, 20, 30, 40, 50 bucks, you say, you know what? Let's play some games together. And that's one of the ways you overcome the guilt. Okay? Now, these days, your kids will always make you feel guilty for something you did 100 years ago. And the solution, just don't give a shit about that. Your kids are just crazy. But let's say that you and I are married. Good relationship. And you're attracted to Jordan. And you come to class and you look at Jordan, he looks at you, and there are sparks everywhere. And you guys go to the bathroom. All gender bathroom. and you go to your stall and he goes to his, and things happen, and you feel guilty. You transgressed. EJ, you look confused.
That took me back.
Yeah. And so you feel guilty. You have broken your marriage vows. Are you going to feel guilty? Absolutely. Will you be ashamed? Yeah. Will you try to like jump from a cliff? Definitely. How do you overcome that? My recommendation, first of all, if I'm your husband, don't tell it to me. I don't need to know. Because men and women function this stuff very, very differently. I will leave you. Okay? And that's going to add more to your guilt. Depending on the weight of the guilt, some guilts are very superficial, so it takes you a day. Some guilts have deep roots. It's going to take you like 5 years. Okay? The first thing you need to understand is guilt takes time to be overcome. Second, there are two parties in guilt, or maybe three. Sometimes you have a goal for yourself, but you sabotage it and then you feel guilty. Okay? It's often true for people who are like chronically depressed, that they want to overcome it and they fall back into it and they feel guilty for not reaching the goal they set for themselves. You read a book, you want to inspire yourself, you want to overcome certain things, but you're unable to, so you just feel a bit more shitty. Okay? Not knowing that self-transformation takes really, really long time. And that's what guilt is. Guilt is like you get your feet stuck in mud. And the more you try to get your feet out, the more you get plunged in. Okay? So sometimes your guilt has to do with the inner battle that you have. Sometimes it's about you and me. It's going to take me a long time to understand why you did what you did. Now, there may come a time where I say, you know, Tiara, I forgive you. I understand. It's okay. Now, even though I understand and I've forgiven you, there's a good chance that you yourself have not forgiven yourself. So even if Jesus Christ was to come down and say, I absolve you of all your sins, if you still believe that you have transgressed, Jesus has no power over you. You have to come to a place of acceptance, and that's tough, okay? Third, guilt is an emotional element that really just stresses you out. You want to like vomit it out. My recommendation, if there is guilt inside you, keep it your secret. Deal with it the best you can. Don't gossip it. Let it be inside you. It'll season you. It'll humble you. It's painful. And your self-image will be profoundly tarnished. You know, you walk around angry all the time. If you have kids and you want them to feel guilty for the way they treat you, that's not going to happen. Until they get to be 50, 60, 70, until they themselves become parents to understand a few things about parenthood, especially in a culture as vulturous as this. But guilt is good to have. Remember the saying in the I think it's the Gospel of Matthew, or no, sorry, yeah, Gospel of Mark, where John the Baptist says, I baptize you with water, but the guy who's come after me, he'll baptize you with fire. Guilt is this baptism through fire. You know, I mean, if your hands are dirty, you can go to the sink and wash it. That's fine. If on the other hand, something about your emotions, something about your mind is dirty, you can't use soap and water. Guilt, anger, regret, remorse, and ultimately acceptance. That's how you cleanse yourself. You know, and it doesn't mean you're not going to repeat the mistake. It just means you have a better understanding now. Well, I hope you guys have a very nice weekend. Take good care. For those who want to go to the office, the door is open. You're more